Hi, and welcome to In Search of Insight, Nootropics Depot's monthly podcast. I'm your podcast host, Erica, and sitting next to me is our product specialist at Nootropics Depot, Emil.
Hey everyone.
Today, Emil and I are going to be telling you all about our brand new greens mix, which is called InfiniGreens. Now, this greens powder has 14 different ingredients in it, so we're going to go through every single ingredient and tell you why we decided to add it to the mix. We're also going to be trying this mix on camera. It'll be my very first time taking this, so I'll do my best to give you my just personal experience and hour-long podcast conversation that we have here. And I'm really curious also in the comments to hear from you guys. Have you tried this? Are you interested in trying it? And for those of you who are undoubtedly going to be mentioning eat salad, comment away.
and really, if you can just constantly eat vegetables, it's going to be kind of the same thing as taking a greens powder, except we wanted to elevate our greens powder a bit. So we do have some really special ingredients in there and some special combinations, which we'll touch on, which you cannot achieve with a salad. But do definitely eat your greens. And that's really one of the main reasons that many others have made a greens blend, and now we have made a greens blend, because it's kind of shocking how little greens most of us eat. I think in the US it's something like only 10% of the entire population eats enough leafy greens and vegetables on a daily basis, which means that 90% aren't. That's a big group of people. And you would think, maybe it's an issue in the US. The nutrition there is not always the best, but it's globally. Even in some of the best eating countries in the world, there's still a lack of vegetable consumption, except for certain places like Italy, some of the places that follow the Mediterranean diet. There's a lot of leafy greens in there, and we'll touch on why that is maybe giving them some extra special benefits, and why maybe some of these leafy greens go really well with extra virgin olive oil. And because of that, extra virgin olive oil actually is also in our InfiniGreens powder. So we took some inspiration around the world and looked at the Mediterranean diet and kind of looked what in a greens powder is actually beneficial. And I think that's also important to talk about, and we'll talk about that in a second. But one, why do we even eat leafy greens to begin with? I think maybe for many others, the reason why greens consumption is maybe not that high is because it's kind of expensive to be eating a lot of greens, because they don't give you that many calories. I was doing a bit of research and seeing, could you even hit your daily caloric intake with only leafy greens and vegetables? And basically the answer is no. You would have to consume such a large volume of it that your stomach just couldn't handle it. You literally could not eat 2,500 calories worth of spinach in a day, for example, or lettuce. So why do we actually eat them? And one of the reasons we eat them is, of course, for their fiber content, nitrate content. We're going to be touching a lot on that. Fatty acids, some proteins, and then of course a bunch of micronutrients, minerals, vitamins, things like that. And another really important thing, and this kind of comes back to the large volume thing, is that these greens powders, the dosage is 15.5 grams. It's quite a lot of powder, but it's a dried powder. But when we consume that powder, it's going to swell up and become voluminous. And that's going to fill us up, just like with if you're eating leafy greens with, let's say you're eating something really calorically dense like a steak, and then your side is maybe a bunch of leafy greens. The steak is not necessarily going to fill you up all that much. It's quite calorically dense. But then if you have a leafy green with it, it's just going to take up more volume in your stomach, and that's going to make you feel full. So that's another aspect of why we should be eating leafy greens, because it kind of makes us feel more satiated with smaller amounts of caloric intake, and that's always good. It helps us lose some weight, of course. And a greens powder can also do that for you. So if you consume it around a meal, for example, you might feel more full from your meal. But we're going to touch on all of that in a sec. I think, like Erica said, we should actually taste some of it, take it. There's no flavoring in this. It's just straight greens and some things like potato starch from Solno. This is a patented product. Maybe a lot of you already know it. It's a really good prebiotic fiber. But there's no flavoring. It's just kind of going to taste like really bland soup or something like that. It's going to be maybe a little bit salty. There's actually quite a lot of minerals in here. So without further ado, let's do that. I measured some out already. So just got some water here, and then this is the greens powder, as you can see. It's probably going to be a little bit messy to mix this, so let me grab a funnel.
Shall I hold this for you?
Yeah, that helps a lot. So, for the both of us, 30 grams of powder.
So 15 grams each?
Yes. Well, 15 and a half, so 31 grams actually. I did 30 grams, but let's pretend I did 31. Okay, let's see if this comes through.
And this is looking actually quite impressive.
Yeah.
And it looks like it's dissolving pretty well already, even before agitation.
Yes. So as Erica mentioned, yeah, it does actually mix surprisingly well, but I don't know if you can see it from here, but there's just a lot of powder floating on the top. These powders are not totally water soluble, and my recommendation for something that's not actually water soluble is to always agitate it, shake it up. If you're just going to stir it with a spoon in a cup, it's going to clump up. You're going to be drinking just clumps of kind of wet powder on the outside, and then once it's in your mouth, it's gonna be dry powder. Not nice. Mix it up. And you really don't have to mix it that much. I mean, that already did the trick. And it already looks nice and foamy. Probably all of those nice saponins in there, which kind of act like a foaming agent, soap. Maybe an indicator of some sort of bioactivity in here, but that's a major stretch. But if you are curious, saponins foam. And so that might be one of the reasons why it's foaming. Okay, proteins and things like that foam too. So it's actually maybe probably more proteins.
Curious.
Because there is 3 grams of protein per serving in here, which, you know, it's not a lot. This is not supposed to be something calorically dense that's going to keep you full, but 3 grams of protein means that there's 3 grams of potential amino acids that get created once those proteins enter your digestive system and they fall apart into peptides and then into amino acids. So that's good. You get some amino acids. Anyways, we'll talk about the nutritional profile in a sec. Let's actually try this. And we're just going to drink this now, but I would recommend if you mix this up and you have the time, just let it sit for about 15 minutes. Then all of that dry vegetable matter is going to have some time to rehydrate. That rehydration is, of course, going to be pretty fast already because we have powdered it into a really fine powder, which increases the surface area, so it enhances how quickly things hydrate, but it's still going to be a little bit gritty right off the shake here. If you let it sit for about 15 minutes, it gets a bit more silky and smooth. But you're probably going to want to slam this anyways, because it's probably not a nice sipping drink. Okay, you got your glass?
Yes. I'm ready. One thing I wasn't anticipating at all was that this powder mix would have somewhat of a hunger satiating effect. But it makes sense because of how dense it is with all of these really nutritious greens.
Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers. Yeah, quite neutral.
Yeah. There's maybe a bit of sweetness, there's actually some just naturally occurring sugars in there. I think we can pull up some of our testing data that tested like the different breakdown of sugars just naturally from the vegetables that are in here. It's not a lot. I think it's about like 4 grams of total sugar split between sucrose and glucose. So there's a little bit of sweetness.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just, to me, it just kind of tastes like the hay in a bunny enclosure or something like that. It kind of has this like pet store kind of vibe to it for me. It's not the best thing. It's not the worst thing. I'm just going to slam this. I think that's just how I'm going to be drinking this.
There's no strong off-putting flavor to it at all. It's maybe slightly salty, slightly sweet.
And I just got like a bunch of non-hydrated stuff at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit gritty. So
yeah.
If you let it stand for a bit longer, then that goes away. There's a little bit left, so...
Bottoms up.
Yeah. But it's a really nice, vibrant green color, as you would expect, of course.
Nice.
Cheers for the second time.
Cheers.
But yeah, quite neutral, not bad. I honestly think, I haven't tried this yet, but if you mix this with some orange juice or something like that, or a different fruit juice, then one, you get a bit more vitamin C and some of the citrus bioflavonoids, and you get the nice greens, and then you have a bit more of an interesting flavor. Then it's probably just going to taste like one of those $12 smoothies you get at Whole Foods.
Hey, speaking of $12 smoothies, is there a price breakdown for what each dose would cost?
That's a really good point, and you're going to have to do this in post.
Definitely.
There's going to be some math appearing here now. I actually don't know what it's exactly costing right now, because I forgot to ask what it's going to cost, and it's not yet on the website. We are actually recording this on the release day, so you'll have been familiarized with the product before this podcast comes up, but right now it's not on the website. Normally I'd quickly log on and check what it is, but I can't right now. But I think it's like $1.50 per serving or something like that.
So, quite some savings compared to your $12
Oh,
Whole
yeah.
Foods green juice and smoothie. By the way, before we continue too far, the greens powder is very powerful, and you've got some really dark green on the corners of your mouth and your, yep,
Am I
perfect.
good now?
And now it's hiding just slightly underneath your mustache.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Are we good?
Yes, we're good. We're totally good.
Or maybe there's some in my teeth too. It's really green.
Yeah. No, I think we're fine. I think
Yeah.
we're doing all right.
We're good.
Yeah, we're good.
So yeah, now that it's been a minute or so since I drank it, the flavor's basically all gone. There's nothing weird lingering there. So
No, there's no bitterness. There's no funkiness at all. If anything, like the smell almost reminds me of like a baking mix somehow. I'm not quite sure why, but basically don't be deterred or afraid of the flavor. It's not unpleasant by any means, but very neutral.
yeah. I mean, I guess if you really hate greens, then maybe it's not the nicest thing, and then you just add some flavoring, and then you still get your greens, because, like I mentioned earlier, 90% of us aren't getting enough greens, so this is a good chance to add some more greens to your diet. And to be honest, I'm guilty of this too, because if I'm at the store and I don't have that much space in my bag, I'm not going to buy the giant thing of lettuce or the giant thing of kale. It's just going to take up too much space in my bag, and I know it's not really going to keep me full. So
And also, it might sit in the fridge for a few days or maybe a week, and then half of it goes bye-bye and
Exactly.
doesn't actually get eaten, which I think we can all relate to.
Yeah. And of course, having greens with your dinner or your lunch is always good. I do always try and get some fresh green stuff or some tomatoes, things like that in there. But to get this amount of greens, so this should be about like 50 grams fresh, like a cup of spinach or something like that, but then split between a whole lot of interesting nutrient-dense greens. So let's get into that. Let's see if the nootropics we've been taking over the years can help me actually recall all 14 ingredients.
Yes.
And if I can't do it, then I think I have a little note card that I can look at. But
This is really impressive. I certainly have not memorized all of them, and I was thinking before, is there a way that I can help organize it? And then I just heard Emil really rehearsing and going through it. So let's put you to the test. Let's put the nootropics to the test. Where are we going to start?
okay, we're going to start. Well, let me just first give an overview, and then we can really start getting into each individual ingredient. 'Cause
Sounds
I
good.
think if we get into each individual ingredient, it's going to be a very long podcast,
Yeah.
and we want to keep it a bit more condensed. So, the first ingredient is Solnol-resistant potato starch. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. It's a patented ingredient. Then next we have Moringa oleifera. Then we have Oh, now I'm psyching myself out.
2 down, 12 to go.
Solnol, Moringa oleifera, we got green banana, we have oat straw, we have barley grass. That's probably where you're getting that pet store smell from, the barley grass and the oat straw together. Then we have kale, we have astragalus. It's quite interesting. We'll touch on that later. Then we have chlorella, spirulina, so those are our 2 algae. Then we have Oxystorm, a really nice nitrate source. We have Olive Guard, which is an extra virgin olive oil powder. We have some nettle leaf, and now we have 2 left. What are they?
I believe in you.
I don't believe in myself. Oh yeah, the last 2, these are actually really interesting and a bit of an odd add-in. It will make sense later. Coriander and parsley. Those are the last 2. And Erica's already nodding because she loves our supercritical coriander extract. This is, of course, not going to be the coriander seeds. This is going to be what we would call cilantro. But cilantro is the leaves of coriander. I actually don't know why there's a difference in names. I have to look that up sometime. But coriander leaf. So cilantro and then parsley. Parsley, as some of you might remember, there was someone on Reddit a little while ago, and he said, why would you waste your money buying Nootropics Depot's apigenin when you can just take parsley? Because, hey, look at this research. Parsley powder contains a bunch of apigenin. We thought, okay, we'll accept this challenge. We went to Costco. We bought some Kroger brand parsley, or is that a Costco brand?
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you got it.
We got some Kroger brand parsley. Honestly, maybe not the best quality parsley in the world either, but we tested it and there was barely any apigenin. However, at elevated doses, like is in here, 1,000 milligrams, 1 gram, you are getting some flavonoids. You're not going to get a full active dose of apigenin, but you're going to get a little bit of apigenin, and you're going to get some of the other related flavonoid type compounds.
If you're curious what apigenin is going to do in terms of perceptible benefits, apigenin is one of the important compounds in chamomile.
Correct.
So if you have drank chamomile tea and you can think about all the different applications for a chamomile, especially before bed, it's going to have a relaxing effect.
Yeah. Okay, so this kind of brings us to this point. Where do we even start describing why we put everything in there? And I think to make it a little bit more easy to digest, we'll break it down into some different areas. Like we mentioned earlier, why do we eat greens? One of the reasons we eat greens is because it fills us up. One of the reasons it fills us up is because it contains a lot of fiber. Fiber doesn't necessarily have a caloric content, basically. So it's just going to be kind of like a filler. That's not going to give you all too many calories, but it does give you some micronutrients, of course. But the main purpose is fiber, and fiber is important for a multitude of reasons. So let's start with one of the primary fibers that's basically in every plant on the planet, and this is cellulose. Cellulose, our bacteria can't ferment it. You really can't do anything with cellulose. But the interesting thing about cellulose is that it bulks up your feces. And you would think, why would I want to bulk up my feces? The reason for this is if you bulk up your feces with some cellulose, you pull some more water into your feces and they will just flow through you a little bit better. So a really bad thing that you could do to yourself is if you have almost no fiber in your diet, your feces are going to be very dense and they're going to be traveling through you and they're going to be impacting into different parts of your GI tract. This is going to cause all sorts of issues. Basically, you want your poop to really just kind of fall through you with as little resistance as possible. And one of the ways for doing this is just by bulking up your feces and pulling some more moisture in it. And something like cellulose can do this. And there's actually a bunch of companies that even just sell straight cellulose as a fiber supplement now. yeah, that's nice. You can have some isolated cellulose. We also, for example, all of our capsules are also made of microcrystalline cellulose. So if you're taking a bunch of our capsules, you're actually also already getting some cellulose. But basically any food you eat is going to have cellulose. And this greens powder with 15.5 grams of greens in there is going to have a lot of cellulose. It's going to help you bulk up some of your feces.
I couldn't help but think about some of these fiber supplements that are advertised on TV usually for older people. And then the thought occurred to me that this greens powder could be a really nice option for people who want to intake more fiber into their diet, but maybe who have trouble with gassiness. Because, yeah, it's never fun, it's uncomfortable, it can be highly inconvenient, but having that good fiber content is really important for keeping your digestive system, just on track and flowing regularly. So this could be also another just like, asterisk, small print situation. This could be good for people who are sensitive to gassiness after eating large amounts of fiber.
Yes and no. We'll touch on that a little bit later. I get where you're coming from, and I think if you take this product over a prolonged period of time, that will be the case. But if you don't have a lot of fiber in your diet, maybe start with a 1/4 scoop, then go up to a 1/2 scoop, then go up. Because if you just throw a bunch of fiber at yourself when you're not used to it, you're going to actually get a bit gassy. And that's because a lot of these fibers are fermentable by bacteria in our microbiome. And I just remembered I should actually go grab the label that I have on my computer so I can tell you exactly how much fiber is in here, because there's actually a lot of fiber. So YouTube magic, I'll be back. I can tell you now exactly how much fiber it contains. So let's see. I was looking for it. Like, did we put it on? Of course we put it on. This is really important. So the total dietary fibers in here is 3 grams. That's 11% of your daily value. So this is not a super high fiber supplement, but it still contains a really significant amount of fiber. So that's going to help with a lot of gastrointestinal comfort, let's say. And 3 grams is a good starting point. So maybe actually with that in mind, maybe I was being a bit too conservative with my recommendation to start a bit lower. A lot of fiber supplements, and we are actually developing a fiber supplement too. A lot of fiber supplements contain more like 10 plus grams of fiber, and that can be quite a lot to handle if you're not used to fiber. But this is probably going to be fine for most people, and I'm assuming most of you listening to this are already living a very healthy lifestyle and you're interested in promoting your health even more, so that probably means you are already including quite a bit of fiber in your diet. If you're not, do that too, and then the greens powder is going to be even more complementary. Okay, so what I was mentioning earlier is that you have fibers that you can't really ferment, like cellulose. Those just help bulk up your feces. But then on top of that, you have fibers that are fermentable by the bacteria in your gut. And you call this then a prebiotic. So what that means is you have this fiber and it very specifically is being fermented by the bacteria in your gut, which means that the bacteria in your gut are eating it. They're using it as a food source. And because they're using it as a food source, they're going to proliferate. Now they have something to feed on, there's going to be more of them. So you're going to help enhance your overall microbiome health. And I think that's a really important part of greens powders and fiber supplements. They are going to help maintain the cultures that are already in your microbiome, which is another big issue, of course, if 90% of us aren't eating enough leafy greens, and this is the main source of fiber in your diet, then yeah, you really should be bumping those levels up so you can enhance your overall microbiome health. Of course, you can take probiotics and things like that, but if you don't actually feed those probiotics with the prebiotics, then how beneficial is that really? So that's a really big element of InfiniGreens too, is that it's acting as a food source for the probiotics that are already existing throughout your gastrointestinal system. Now, on top of that, and this is, of course, you always want to eat leafy greens because they contain higher levels of zinc, magnesium, all of that. That's definitely true. It would get extremely, extremely expensive to do the analysis on all of that. So we haven't done an analysis on all of the minerals and all of the vitamins that would make this such an expensive product. No one would really be able to afford it, because this is a question we get sometimes, like, why do you guys only focus on one of these quality markers? Just be happy that we focus on a quality marker at all, because a lot of people in the supplement industry aren't really looking at any quality markers at all, but every quality marker costs money. Let's say we test for one compound, that's $200. Then we test for another compound, that's another $200. Now we're testing for 20 compounds, and it adds up.
And from 14 ingredients, there's a whole lot of compounds that you could be testing for.
Yes, so there's a very wide variety of vitamins, minerals, micronutrients in here. We can kind of look up the generic research that's out there, like what's the general nutrition profile of kale? Well, now you know there's a gram of kale powder in here. You can equate that kind of to the fresh weight and see, maybe you're getting some vitamin K now. Kale is known for having a lot of vitamin K, for example. And some of these other leafy greens have some higher levels of zinc and magnesium. Now, a couple of things that we did test, and that's on the nutrition fact label too. Sodium is one of them. You have to put that on there because this is now a food product, so we had to put that on there. Unfortunately, as you'll see, Eric, I can put the label here. Mm-hmm. It's a big label. We kind of ran out of space to put anything else on there, which I find a shame because we did actually analyze the potassium content of this, and if I get permission, I haven't been able to ask yet if we can post this, but I'm pretty sure we can post it. Here is a big report of all of the stuff that we measured. Calcium is a part of that, iron is a part of that, potassium is a part of that, and sodium is a part of that. And I think the one that I really want to focus on is potassium. Potassium is really beneficial. It helps balance out some of the negative effects of sodium. It's good for cardiovascular function, for cognitive function, and also for mood. This is also one of the reasons why a lot of people like eating bananas, because they contain high potassium levels, coconut because they contain high potassium levels, and of course, there's green banana powder in here. So that's a significant potassium source. And actually the oxystorm, which is an amaranth species and an extract of it to get nitrate out of it in the form of potassium nitrate. So that one contains quite a lot of potassium as well. In total, it was 270-ish milligrams of potassium, which I find quite significant. So you can kind of get an idea just based on a few of those. So I think there's about 80 milligrams of calcium. There's about like 40-ish. No, don't take my word for the iron. We'll be able to see the ppm amounts. If you know what you're doing, you can do the calculations. The iron content is not super high, but it's there. Calcium is there at about 80 milligrams, and then potassium and sodium. And all of those are beneficial, and you can imagine if those minerals are there in those significant quantities, then some of these other trace minerals are probably also going to be in there. There's going to be some zinc in there and things like that. And then, of course, like we mentioned, there's going to be a bunch of flavonoids, polyphenols, all sorts of interesting stuff, fatty acids in all of these plants that we don't exactly know what it is, but we know just from the research that's out there, these plants are beneficial for that. So with any greens powder, the real, I think, attractor is that you get a micronutrient boost, and you're getting a micronutrient boost not from isolated vitamins or minerals, but from whole food powders, which is always good. This is no different than going to your store and eating some greens. Again, you can still do that. This is just more convenient. And, like I mentioned earlier, we put some special tricks in there. So let's start talking about that.
Yes.
And maybe let's take 1 second to reflect if we can feel anything at this point yet.
Mm-hmm. You know, to be honest, the feeling I have is I feel a slight energy boost, and I feel also a slight kind of hunger satiation, but it's not extreme. And one thing I was curious about as you were explaining the mineral breakdown is if our Infinilite also contains a good amount of potassium as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the case?
That is the case.
Okay.
Let me quickly look up how much that is. Okay, I have my my computer here again, looking at the nutrition facts for Infinilite, and we have 400 milligrams of potassium per 4 scoop serving of Infinilite. So, 270 milligrams from 1 serving of InfiniGreens. Really significant amount of potassium.
It's a serious amount of potassium. The reason why I also asked this is because this very slight energy boost that I'm feeling reminds me of the energy boost that I get from Infinilite. And it's kind of funny because neither of these products are really formulated for energy specifically, but I have noticed every time that I've taken Infinilite, it feels both calming and energizing, and that's a similar kind of effect, a subtle effect that I'm getting from InfiniGreens. So perhaps this is coming from some of the mineral content.
It could. It's really hard to determine whether or not this is happening, but as we're going, I feel a little bit flushed, a little bit more warm, something that I associate with a little bit of vasodilation. And I think that gets me to my point that I'm trying to make here is one of the things that greens also provide is a source of dietary nitrate. And if you're not familiar with what nitrates do in the body, one big function of it is that nitrate, through some enzymes in your saliva and throughout your gastrointestinal system, can get turned into nitrite, and nitrite in one quick step can turn into nitric oxide. So when we're talking about nitric oxide boosters like L-citrulline, L-arginine, agmatine, those work through a much more complex and roundabout way of increasing nitric oxide. Nitrite, being formed from nitrate, is very quick. So one thing that we really wanted to focus on with this is leafy greens contain nitrates, so all of the leafy greens that we have in our blend will have a significant nitrate content, but then on top of that we put oxystorm in there. So oxystorm is a new extract. It's being made by the same people that actually make Shodan. This is also one of the reasons I wanted to put that in there, because I really like Shodan and I like the team behind Shodan, and I thought a nitrate angle would be really interesting. And the oxystorm is providing 9% nitrate from 500 milligrams of powder. So let me just do some quick math. That's around 50 milligrams of nitrate, right? 10% of 500. Yeah.
Excellent. Yes.
It's a bit less. It's like 47 milligrams or something like that of nitrate. A pretty significant dose of nitrate. And I would assume there's maybe another 10 to 20 milligrams coming from some of the other leafy greens that are in here. Nitrate is important because of nitric oxide, and nitric oxide is important because nitric oxide allows your blood vessels to relax and to dilate.
And for those of you who aren't familiar with what a nitric oxide booster is going to do, it's going to give you the pump.
Yes, that's one thing. If you take a nitric oxide booster and you go to the gym and you work out, your blood vessels are more dilated. So let's say you're doing some bicep curls, you're sending blood to your bicep every time you curl. Like you need more energy, and energy in the form of blood and oxygen and ATP. That's all in your blood. If your blood vessels are more open, you're going to be able to deliver more blood to that muscle that you're working out, and it's going to kind of inflate and balloon a little bit, and you're going to get a pump. Especially if you're quite trained already and you go to the gym, you know this feeling really well. And maybe, for example, if you're a climber and one of the first times you went climbing and you're really holding on and you can feel your forearms swelling up and getting tight, that's also kind of a pump.
Or you're a music nerd and you practice your instrument super hard, and then you let your hands fall to the side, and then you see, ooh, my veins are looking quite big. This is my recognizable pump feeling.
And if you take a nitric oxide booster, you would have more of that. But beyond that, nitric oxide is also important for erections, for example, for sexual arousal for women as well, because you need blood flow there as well. And the more generic benefit is that it's good for your cardiovascular function, because if your blood vessels are tight, you increase the resistance, and if you increase the resistance, you increase the pressure. If I say one other word with pressure, the FDA is not going to be very happy with me, so
But
use your imagination there.
You know what we're talking about.
Yes. So if you consume more nitrates, less pressure, good. Now, if we look at the Mediterranean diet that I mentioned earlier, a lot of people have a lot of theories why this works. Oh, it's because they consume a lot of extra virgin olive oil. That's why everyone's going crazy for extra virgin olive oil now. Oh, it's because it contains a lot of polyphenols. It's because it contains good fats. And all of this is true. There's a lot of elements that go into the Mediterranean diet. But one really interesting thing to note is that in the Mediterranean diet, the average nitrate consumption is about 1,200 milligrams. If you compare that to the nitrate consumption in the rest of the world, it's more like 100 to 200 milligrams a day. And another group of people, or a whole country, that is quite famous for living to very old ages and generally being quite healthy, are Japanese people. And Japanese people also have a very high nitrate intake, also right around that 1,200 milligrams a day level. So there's certainly something there. Now, I mentioned extra virgin olive oil, and this is really interesting to explore. When you have a nitrate source, and a lot of people in the Mediterranean diet are consuming a lot of fresh leafy greens, which contain a lot of nitrates, together with olive oil. If you've ever been to a Mediterranean country, Greece, Italy, all of these countries, you're constantly eating salads with a lot of olive oil over it. And the interesting thing about this is if you put nitrates, specifically nitrite, in your gut at a low pH, and you then combine it with fatty acids like oleic acid, which is really high in extra virgin olive oil, then you get a compound called nitroleic acid. And nitroleic acid and other fatty acids can turn into these nitro compounds too. So NOFA, nitro fatty acids. There's a lot of research on them. They're strong inflammation regulating compounds. They're strong oxidation regulating compounds. They also help with vasodilation, and they seem to just have a whole lot of beneficial effects throughout the body. And I totally was not aware of this. I discovered this out of nowhere at a certain point, and we hadn't even planned this, but we had extra virgin olive oil in there already, and we had a nitrate source in there already, and then at a certain point I put two and two together and I realized, hey, we're replicating this very probably crucial element of the Mediterranean diet and the Japanese diet. Japanese diet also has a lot of good fatty acids and a lot of nitrates. They're also creating these compounds.
And a lot of dark leafy greens in the form of seaweed. I'm thinking about sushi, I'm thinking about nori, and those greens are really, really dark and really nutritionally dense.
Yes. And of course, we have two algae sources in InfiniGreens too, the spirulina. Actually, spirulina could be giving you a bit of energy too. Spirulina is energizing. You might think, hey, these people are crazy. They're feeling significant effects from a greens powder. I think we can both agree, like, what we're feeling, we're kind of grabbing at, too.
For sure. And it's also based on referencing other products from Nootropics Depot that have somewhat of a similar ingredient profile. And for me, the closest other product that I can compare it to is Infinilite. And that energy boost that I'm feeling, it's very subtle. But if you also experience this too, and if you keep that in mind while taking InfiniGreens, perhaps there's something a little bit similar about the character. But in general, this InfiniGreens powder does not have a super strong character in terms of perceptible benefits. This is going to be a product that you will probably feel the benefits of over time and not within the first couple of times of actually taking it.
Absolutely. And it's going to build up, and it's more of like a daily thing that you want to take, especially if you're not always good about making something with a lot of fresh greens in there. I'm guilty of that. Because of that, I want to really add InfiniGreens to my daily stack. Paul has been for quite a while now, and he ran out of it before we went into the production batch. And he's really missing it because he says it really makes him feel good. That's also honestly one of the reasons why we kind of push this release forward maybe a little bit too fast. I think our production staff has been a bit stressed, but we really wanted to get it out there. Paul really wanted to take it. I really wanted to take it. So we've really been like, hey, can you release this product? We want to start taking it because we're starting to run out of our beta testing samples. Luckily, I kept literally 2 more servings that we just consumed, but that's all I had left. It's a nice one. It, like Erica said, it's subtle, but for me, it's more of a peace of mind thing. It's good to get your greens. I don't always get enough greens in a day. Here, I can supplement with that.
Okay, now I want to wrangle this in a little bit.
Yeah.
Because we started with talking about cellulose, and then you also mentioned spirulina. And I want to get back to that ingredient list because we can talk all day about why it's great to take a greens powder, but I think for you guys, it's also really interesting to know what the function is of these different ingredients that are there. So the cellulose is functioning as a fiber source. Yeah. And this is going to help digestion. And
then you have all sorts of other fibers in there. Cellulose is not the only one. Cellulose is just the most common one.
Sure.
You have all sorts of other fibers.
Okay.
So, yeah. This is why I was saying earlier, and thanks for kind of bringing me back on track. It's pretty hard. You kind of get lost in the sauce with this many ingredients, because what do I say if I spend a half an hour on each one? It's going to be like a day-long podcast. So thanks for reeling me back in a little bit. So one thing that we were just talking about was those nitro fatty acids. I think that's super fascinating, and one of the reasons why we have Oxystorm and extra virgin olive oil in there. Extra virgin olive oil contains a lot of oxidation regulating compounds like oleocanthal, and of course the Mediterranean diet is very high in olives and olive oil, and when we went to Portugal recently, we were just drowning in olive oil and olives, and I felt great the whole time I was there. We also consume a lot of olive oil here, and we have a really nice Syrian supermarket around the corner, and they stock a lot of really nice Syrian olives that I'm snacking on a lot. So we're already getting a lot of olives, but it's nice to have some olives in, or an olive product in here as well. It's not a super high dose of olive oil, so you don't also have to worry that this is going to be very calorically dense now. It's not that crazy, but it gives a nice substrate of fatty acids that can react with those nitrates. And of course, all of the other leafy greens also contain these fatty acids. But now, let's get back to compartmentalizing everything and kind of organizing it. So we've talked about fiber, we have talked about nitrates, we have talked about fatty acids. So now I think it's important to touch on some of the more nootropic things that we put in. So we wanted to make a greens blend, and we wanted to focus on those fibers, on those micronutrients, but we also wanted to add in a few leafy greens that we know from research has cognition enhancing effects. We are Nootropics Depot after all, so it would be a huge wasted opportunity if we made a greens blend that didn't have any sort of nootropic properties. So one of the first ones that you might have noticed is Moringa oleifera. Moringa oleifera is a really famous plant in the nootropics community because there's a study that compared Moringa oleifera to a compound that starts with pi and ends with tam, and I can't mention it here, but if you know, you know. And they seem to have similar types of cognition enhancing effects. So Moringa oleifera also is very nutrient dense, has nice fatty acid composition, so that's why there's Moringa oleifera in here, to add that nice nootropic edge. It's something that we all know about. We thought it would be a recognizable name too. The research is there, you can go look it up. It's a really interesting one, and of course it contains the fibers, the fatty acids, the micronutrients, all of the things that we would want in a green. Another one that's famously nootropic is oat straw. Someone was mentioning it on our subreddit the other day too. I think they call it milky oats. I'm not sure if it's the same thing or if it's Avena sativa. That's oat straw at an earlier stage in its growth cycle. I'm not sure, but they were mentioning why doesn't anyone really carry these milky oats? They have a really good nootropic effect. Well, here you go. There's oat straw in here. Oat straw contains some compounds like vitexin and isovitexin that act as monoamine oxidase B inhibitors, and that can have, maybe that's a little bit where some of this energy is coming from too, perhaps. Maybe a little bit of the moringa too. But again, these are just a gram of dried powder. It's not an extract, so it's not going to produce a really strong effect from that plant, but it's there. And all of these together create a subtle nootropic effect. We also didn't want this to be really, really noticeable. That would be a bit weird as well for a greens blend, because at the end of the day, you're just trying to supplement your diet with this and not necessarily reaching a certain effect. But we thought we would round it out with some choice greens that actually do have some research behind them for being nootropic as well. And that's of course also why there's parsley and apigenin in here for that flavonoid content. We know there's a lot of flavonoids and polyphenols in there. Those can have inflammation regulating effects. They can have oxidation regulating effects, and they can have positive effects on maybe our mood state, and by extension maybe also cognitive function. So that's another one that's really in there for its more nootropic leaning effects.
I can't claim that this is really happening, but I like to imagine that the greens powder is making my nootropic and cognitive facilities better in real time. And I just realized we've already actually talked about parsley, cilantro, olive oil, moringa, fiber, and we've yet to talk about kale. But what I'm realizing is I'm thinking back to what you've discussed already, and you actually have covered half, if not more than half of the ingredients before.
Yeah.
So perhaps we are getting sharper in real time with our conversation. Perhaps it's also just listening to you go through the ingredients that I'm reminded of all the things that we've covered so far. But kale is a really recognizable leafy green. I think everybody knows or has heard at some point in time that you should include a little bit of kale in your diet. I know 10 years ago it was like really all the rage. We were all massaging our kale. We were adding kale to our smoothies. It's been a staple in Dutch cuisine for all time. It's a really hardy vegetable that grows and survives just fine in the wintertime.
In fact, it's better in the wintertime. So the best kale in the Netherlands is when you have the first frost layer. So you harvest it with a bit of frost, then it's extra sweet is kind of how the legend goes. I'm not sure if that's actually true. But the kale here, to be honest, is much better than kale elsewhere. Like, it's not as I feel like sometimes when I've had kale in the US, it's really tough. Like,
that's why you gotta massage it. If you didn't get that memo, maybe now you know. But speaking of which, if you can't join us in eating delicious kale grown in the Netherlands, then you can get some good kale from the InfiniGreens. And I think it's good that we kind of bring it back. What is the main reason why we're adding kale into the mix, actually?
So kale is in there for a couple of reasons. Again, it's a good fiber source. But kale is a brassica, and all brassicas contain glucosinolates. You might know this from, for example, sulforaphane. Sulforaphane is derived from glucoraphanin. Glucoraphanin is the glucosinolate, and when the glucosinolate loses its sugar groups, then it becomes an isothiocyanate. So in the case of sulforaphane, which I think is probably the most famous example here, you have that glucosinolate, glucoraphanin, and then there's an enzyme called myrosinase, and that rips off those sugar groups, and then you have sulforaphane, the isothiocyanate. Now, kale also contains a bunch of these types of glucosinolates, which is also why a lot of brassicas have sometimes like a little bit of a spicy flavor even. For example, mustard, also a brassica, also contains a lot of glucosinolates, and it contains specific glucosinolates that actually produce spicy tasting isothiocyanates.
Another brassica that you might be familiar with is maca.
Yeah, and maca actually contains a lot of glucosinolates too.
Which makes me wonder, what function does a glucosinolate have? What is this doing for us? Or do we feel a perceptible effect from this?
Maybe. There actually are some glucosinolates. We're still doing some research on this, but there seems to be at least 1 or 2 glucosinolates that when they convert to their isothiocyanate, they have a stimulating effect. So maybe a little bit, but I'm not sure if those are present in kale. Those are present in some others that we're exploring. I would say the kale's maybe the most neutral thing here. I think we can both agree that after eating, the dish in the Netherlands is called boerenkool. It's basically you take potatoes and you boil them together with kale, and then you mash it all together, and then you put some delicious bits of bacon, and it's very nice.
And a smoked sausage on top.
And a smoked sausage.
And mustard.
And some mustard. But I don't think I've ever felt some sort of effect from that.
I mean, aside from feeling super cozy and warm and full, no, I can't say that I really feel a nootropic effect from eating boerenkool. No.
And that's a really large amount of kale.
Yeah.
And we're just talking about a gram here. So,
okay. So in terms of like nootropic effects, the kale isn't necessarily going to be influencing that at all. But
it does.
You have to include kale in a greens powder, in my opinion.
And there's some glucosinolates in there, and those glucosinolates, when they turn into the isothiocyanates, like sulforaphane, for example, it has oxidation regulating effects, it has inflammation regulating effects, so those are just really good effects to have there too.
I like that you said that kale is the most neutral. What is the most non-neutral ingredient in this mix in terms of effects?
Probably the moringa.
Mm-hmm.
The oat straw, it's probably between the oat straw and moringa for a more cognitive thing, and for a more like the vasodilation effects that I still really think I can notice that. This is something that I've always noticed with nitric oxide boosters, or things that just generally enhance my vasodilation, like going to a sauna, for example. I kind of feel this warm, flushed, relaxed feeling. Vasodilation is good for me. I also have some of this pressure thing in my family, so it probably helps with that for me too.
But which ingredient is having the biggest effect on vasodilation?
Oxystorm.
Oxystorm. Cool.
Yes.
I missed that. Yeah.
Because
Oxystorm.
that has 9% nitrates, and it's that's a significant source of nitrates.
Okay.
If you consider that most of us in the Western world are eating anywhere between it's even lower. I've seen like between 50 to 200 milligrams of nitrates a day. You're almost getting 50 milligrams of nitrates with one serving of InfiniGreens. So for many of us, that's already like half the amount of, or maybe all of the nitrates that we consume on a daily basis. So that's significant.
I asked Emil, but aren't nitrates bad? Because I heard that with lunch meat, like lunch meat is one of the, or, cold cut sliced meat, it's one of the highest nitrate containing foods, and that this is bad for you. So I thought, how does this work? Why would we want a nitrate source?
And that's actually false. The highest nitrate containing foods are leafy greens. Much, much higher than in processed meats. The problem with processed meats is that they contain large amounts of proteins, and they go through a heat treatment process. Usually they're cooked, they're smoked, whatever it may be. And when you have proteins, nitrite, and heat, then you can create these compounds called nitrosamines. And nitrosamines can also, to a certain extent, get created in your gut. And nitrosamines they're made out to be these really, really bad compounds. So they're not good by any means, but a lot of people are like, oh, you just look at a nitrosamine and you get cancer. Nitrosamines are carcinogenic, but that also gets taken out of context. If we're talking about the Mediterranean diet, what are they also eating a lot of?
Sausage.
Cured meats.
Cured meat.
And cured meats also contain those nitrites, because without them, it just wouldn't cure right. But anyways, to get back to the actual point, when you're getting nitrates from vegetable sources, you're also often getting antioxidants with it, like vitamin C, for example, and that's going to push the nitrite to then form nitric oxide. So that's the path it's going to take. And if you look, for example, at vegetarians, they have much, much higher nitrate consumption, and they don't seem to have any negative effects with it. If you look in Japan and what I was saying in the Mediterranean diet, you have lots of nitrates there, but those nitrates are coming from vegetables. And nitrates in that form, in that context, in that matrix of other things is fine. The problem is with cured meats, and even then I think the risks are a little bit overblown. I think the real problem with eating cured meats is that you're getting a lot of not good fatty acids, inflammatory fatty acids like arachidonic acid, which is high in a lot of pork meats, and a lot of these lunch meats are based on pork. So there's some other issues there, and of course the big thing is high sodium content. If you're eating sausages all day long, like these Portuguese sausages that we're eating, Spanish, Italian, these hams, they're super salty. You're not going to be eating a ton of that every day. But if you're going to like Subway every day and you're getting a foot long with just an enormous amount of processed meats on there, like ham or whatever, it's probably not the best thing to be eating every day. But nitrates from vegetables, good. Nitrates from vegetables, extra good when you combine them with good fats, like extra virgin olive oil.
Which, of course, is in the InfiniGreens.
Yes.
Thanks for answering that.
And of course, in the Mediterranean diet, there's also a lot of interesting things around all of this nitrate and nitrite in meats, because they stew a lot of their meats in wine, and wine contains acids and antioxidants that help there, and they think there's a lot, like some of these, when you put alcohol and wine and all of this in with the fats, you get some esterification of those fats, and that's good, and there's a lot of complex things going on there. I think this is just really fascinating that with InfiniGreens, we're putting a foot into more of the food industry side of things, which is really interesting to me, and there's a lot of different processing methods and things that you can use to make food healthier. One of those is like stewing your meat in wine, which a lot of Italians and French people do, and when we make stews, it's usually also being stewed in wine. Man,
I'm getting so hungry now thinking about all of these different foods, especially the sausages. But I do think we also need to visit some of these maybe underdog ingredients that are in the InfiniGreens mix. What have we not focused on as much in this conversation so far?
So barley grass we haven't really talked about.
Yes.
And green banana we haven't really talked about. I think barley grass most of us can remember. If you're around our age or older, maybe if you're younger you don't remember this, but if you remember people doing the wheatgrass juicing.
Oh yeah.
That's barley grass.
Oh, okay.
So maybe if you recognized a bit of that smell too, it's from that wheatgrass juice.
Yes.
Thing.
Jamba Juice for the win. Who's with me? Yes, the Jamba Juice wheatgrass shots. I wasn't taking them. I was too young for that at the time. I wasn't a health wellness nut yet. But the smell I really remember.
I was a nerd and am a nerd and was taking wheatgrass shots as like a 10, 12-year-old because I just thought it was cool, I guess.
I mean, the smoothies, I was super into the smoothies. Antioxidants I was aware of at that time. The wheatgrass was a little bit beyond my interest, but... Yeah. Okay, that's where the barley grass familiarity comes from. Makes sense.
And one of the reasons that it was so popular is because it's really nutrient dense. I don't think there's necessarily anything really special about barley grass, except for the fact that it's nutrient dense. And again, it's green. It contains chlorophyll. That's another thing that I guess we can talk about a little bit. This contains a lot of chlorophyll. Chlorophyll has been said to have, for example, it's good for bad breath and things like that, and might have oxidation regulating effects. I'm not sure how much trust I put into that. That's a bit pseudoscientific, but the one thing is you are getting a lot of chlorophyll here, and that might have some beneficial effects on oxidative stress. What we haven't really talked about is the two algae sources.
Yes, you mentioned spirulina, but not the other one. What's the second one?
So the second one is chlorella.
Chlorella. Okay.
Chlorella is another really famous one. Another one where people are like, you should take chlorella because it has a lot of chlorophyll and it will make your body odor better and it will make your breath smell better and things like that. And I remember when we went to one of these conferences at work in Las Vegas, like a natural health expo, half of the booths at the time were all doing chlorella. One of the reasons why we've never released a straight chlorella product is because I don't think as a standalone ingredient it's super interesting. There's been a lot of you guys on Reddit that have argued with me that it is interesting, and I have kind of come around a little bit more. It does seem to have some interesting effects. I don't think at the dose that's in InfiniGreens it's necessarily a standout ingredient that's really producing a unique effect, but spirulina is a different story in my opinion. And maybe a lot of you who have been around for a while will remember that Examine.com had a really good article about spirulina, and they were saying like a lot of these things seem like bullshit, but spirulina is not bullshit. It actually seems to have a lot of research on it. It has a lot of beneficial health effects, and I even remember this might be one of my earliest memories of supplements. It was really popular in the Netherlands at the time, and maybe even in the US at the time, to do like a spirulina cleanse. So my mom would take like lots of these little tablets of spirulina. And I remember just being kind of fascinated about that. Yeah. And then I thought it was interesting that on Examine.com there was actually a lot of evidence for it. And it contains these bioactive molecules that I'm now blanking on the name. It's too much to remember in this episode. But it contains a really interesting compound. If Erica can remember,
I'll add the text in.
Yeah.
Yes.
Here, you can ask me after. It's an interesting class of compounds that has a lot of research about it. I would definitely recommend looking up some of the research there. And the spirulina could have some mood-boosting properties, some cognition-enhancing properties, and it also contains some good fatty acids, some omega-3s, things like that. That's in algae. For example, we have an algae DHA product, like a vegan fish oil. Spirulina is similar. It also contains these omega-3 fatty acids, so that's good. So that's spirulina. That's chlorella. Those, I think, really round it out as well, especially because now we have some land-based greens, some ocean-based greens.
Sky-based greens? No,
sky-based greens. Not yet. I don't know what that would be.
No, me neither. Actually, I think sky-based greens just makes me think of viruses, so let's not go down that path at all.
So green banana is one we haven't talked much about.
Hanging from a tree. There's our sky-based greens.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Right. So green banana is really in there for the fiber source and potassium, which we've talked about already.
Yeah. Okay, let's do another round through all of the ingredients just so we can be sure.
Okay, so I have the formula in the back here. We have oat straw, spirulina, moringa oleifera, parsley powder, oxystorm, barley grass. Hey, this is one we've forgotten about. Astragalus. So,
yes.
Astragalus is a really interesting one. We have actually 2 astragalus extracts as well. One of them is our astragaloside 4 product. 5? VI is 5?
VI is 6. IV is 4. So you've probably got it.
I think it's astragaloside 4.
I think it's 4.
I just always look at the. It has a Latin numeral, so I think it's astragaloside 4.
V is 5. VI would be 6, and IV would be 4.
Yeah, I think it's astragaloside 4. So.
Excellent. Yes, let's go forth.
So astragaloside 4, which is a glucoside, and then when that glucose group falls off, the sugar group falls off, then you get cycloestragenol, which we then call the aglycone, and we have both of those. So we have one that's astragaloside 4, we have one that's cycloestragenol, and those are kind of anti-aging products because both, astragaloside 4 probably doesn't have a whole lot of effects on its own, but when it turns into cycloestragenol seems to enhance telomere length. And telomeres are these caps on the end of our DNA, and as we age, they unravel, and the more unraveled they get, the less protected our DNA is, and then our DNA starts folding in weird ways, and then we get to our ultimate demise. So a lot of people think if you can keep that telomere cap on your DNA longer, then you might have a longer lifespan. So a lot of these Brian Johnson type guys, and in the past we had Dave Asprey. There's basically like every 5 or 10 years one of these guys just disappears and we get a new one.
The live forever ones.
The live forever ones.
Yeah.
Now we have Brian Johnson. He's really taking it to the next level. The guy honestly creeps me out a little bit.
Any Brian Johnson fans? Oh, not. Give us a thumbs up.
I don't know why you would want to live to 150 in this world. But anyways, they think that if you can increase telomere length, then you can have more graceful aging, more longer life. And that's really where I think this whole anti-aging thing is important. The older we get, I would want to maybe live to like 90 or 100, but actually live to 90 or 100 as a fully capable human being. I want to be able to go for a walk. If I can't go for a walk anymore, I'm going to throw myself off the tallest building around.
I want to be able to play my instruments.
Yeah, same thing. So.
I want to be able to go to the bathroom by myself.
So that's another thing, like with this whole 150-year-old thing, like you're probably going to be a pile of mush on the ground by the time you're 150, and good job for reaching that, but you're a mess. I've seen this with some family members that got really old, but not in a healthy fashion, and that's not fun. So one of these things with astragalus is it helps with oxidative stress too, with telomere length, so it can help you age more elegantly, as I like to say it. And that's not one of the reasons that astragalus is in here. One of the reasons astragalus is in here is because at lower dosages it seems to be a little bit energizing. That's probably what we're feeling.
Okay, nice.
So that subtle energizing thing's probably astragalus, and it's also an adaptogen, so it's good for your overall stress levels. Again, it's going to be subtle, but 1,000 milligrams of straight astragalus is a somewhat decent dosage, so you're going to feel that astragalus, and I think that's a really interesting addition to this stack.
Okay, let's go back to the ingredients list, because that was really helpful. Now we know what astragalus is doing.
Okay, I have my computer, and I have the real ingredient list, so let's go through that one more time. Solnol-resistant potato starch, we've talked about that. I think I haven't gone into enough depth on that one yet. So one of the reasons why you also want these prebiotics is because they act as precursors for these short-chain fatty acids. One of them is butyrate. Maybe a lot of you are familiar with that one. And butyrate has a bunch of different beneficial health effects throughout the body. And this is one of the reasons why you actually want to enhance your microbiome health, why you want the proper amount of bacteria and the right bacteria, because they can munch on these prebiotics and they can, there's no better way in saying this, they then poop out these short-chain fatty acids. And those short-chain fatty acids are really important to us. And there are various different types of fiber supplements that are more suited at creating these short-chain fatty acids. Solnol happens to be really good at creating these short-chain fatty acids. And there's a significant amount of solnol in here at 3.5 grams. And it's a clinically studied ingredient, so you can go look up their clinical trials and you can see that it really does have an effect on short-chain fatty acids. And short-chain fatty acids are also good for mood and cognitive function, and probably underlie a lot of the actual benefits of taking prebiotics and probiotics. So that's a really important thing to mention. And solnol is like a really premium, patented fiber ingredient that has the research on it to actually show you that it's beneficial in this manner. That's one of the reasons it's in there. I think that's also unique. Not a lot of these greens blends have these really unique patented ingredients in there. And they're mostly reserved for more condensed stacks, things like a fiber supplement, but yeah, fiber is important in the whole greens equation, so we put it in there. Okay. So we did solnol, we did moringa, we did green banana, we did oat straw, we did barley grass, we did astragalus, we did kale, we did coriander, we did parsley, we did chlorella, we did spirulina, we did the Olive Guard extra virgin olive oil powder, which, interesting to mention, olive oil is obviously a liquid, so how do you make it into a powder? Well, you spray dry it onto acacia fiber, which you actually do see in a lot of other fiber supplements too. Acacia fiber is a really good fiber as well. And the Olive Guard has both extra virgin olive oil and this acacia fiber. So that's a really nice 2-in-1 as well.
Let's skip to the last ingredient, Oxystorm, which we did already talk about, because now we can talk about the very last ingredient that we haven't discussed yet, which is nettle leaf. And I'm particularly excited to talk about this one because I don't know much about it, but what I do know is that it's popular amongst the hippies and the witches, and nettle leaf has some, kind of folkloric stories about it. Of course, nettles, it is really painful, uncomfortable if you touch them, but they have very powerful health benefits. I just don't know what exactly.
So one of the things that people use nettle for is for prostate health. So it's a popular one amongst men and for hormonal balance. So that's one of the reasons it's in here as well. But it's at a bit of a lower dose at 500 milligrams. Yeah, 500 milligrams. So it's really, again, in there as a fiber source. And one of the things we did, we could have also just said, okay, we're going to do Solnol, we're going to do 14 grams of kale, and then a bit of Oxystorm.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that is, and I always like focusing on this in formulating, is bioactive diversity. So every time we make a stack, we want to increase the bioactive diversity. Look, for example, at the other product that we released together with InfiniGreens, which is Uricomax. This is our Tonga Dali stack. I think the next podcast will actually be about Uricomax. One of the things that we did with Uricomax is we wanted to keep the overall uricomanone level high. That ended up coming out to 7 milligrams, which actually is 3 milligrams under a full dose of our Tonga Dali 10% uricomanone extract. But one of the things that we wanted to implement more of is more bioactive diversity. So getting, basically, if we run it through our analytical machine, you usually get this line and a blip with compounds. And if we look at, for example, our 10% uricomanone extract, it's basically just one blip of uricomanone, and then there's not a whole lot else going on. Like, the extraction process is really focused on isolating that uricomanone, which is important. A lot of the research on Tonga Dali is on uricomanone and the effects that it produces. But there are, of course, other compounds in Tonga Dali, and when we look more at traditional use, they don't have the capabilities to basically just get out uricomanone and not a whole lot else. So from a more traditional use perspective, there's a much, much wider variety of bioactive compounds. And these bioactive compounds could be synergistic with each other. You see this, for example, in hemp and cannabis research with all of the entourage effect. There are complementary compounds within the plant that help with the effects of one of the main bioactives. I can't really get into that with the hemp thing for obvious reasons, but that's a really good example of something that's really been studied for the entourage effect, having multiple compounds being complementary to each other. And that's something we really try and do with our stacks. So the reason there's so many different types of greens in here is because there's maybe some more micronutrients in this plant and some more micronutrients in that plant, and they all kind of round each other out. If we just put all of our eggs in one basket with kale, for example, and that batch of kale just didn't happen to contain a whole lot of selenium, then there's just no selenium in the mix. But if we do 10, 12 different plant sources, then there's a much higher likelihood we are going to get a more diverse profile of micronutrients, macronutrients, and interesting bioactives. So that's another reason why we sprinkled a little bit of nettle leaf in there. It does seem to contain some bioactives. It also seems to act on the testosterone to DHT conversion, so we didn't want to go too heavy there either, but it does provide some nice balance. And yeah, it's just another nice one to have in there, but it's not really going to jump out at you.
This reminds me of the conversation we had with Carrie Hughes about biodiversity. And there's, of course, a difference between bioactive diversity and biodiversity, but I think the principle is somewhat the same. Biodiversity is good for nature, it's good for the environment, and certainly the animals that are going to be eating from that diverse, greens or plants, this and that, we're also animals, and it makes sense that variety with the bioactive compounds that we eat is also going to be healthy. Yeah. So if you're a person who does eat leafy greens, but maybe you're always eating spinach, could also be a good idea to mix up the different kinds of leafy greens that you're eating. And InfiniGreens is like salad in powder form.
Yeah, exactly. And a really complex salad. Like if you were to go out and source all of these in fresh form and make a salad with it, it would be a bit of a Frankenstein salad. There'd be a lot going on there. It probably wouldn't taste very good with all of those different flavors going on, like parsley and coriander together with like moringa and kale, and it's probably not the nicest thing. But here, when flavor is not necessarily so important, and we know that there's research on all of these plants and that some of them contain nootropic compounds and some of them contain oxidation and inflammation lowering compounds, and some of them contain fatty acids, and some of them contain nitrates that can interact with the fatty acids and create new compounds. You get all of this interaction and synergy happening between all of the different ingredients, and then you have InfiniGreens, and it works well. And when I always like kind of vetting some of our formulations by just running it through Perplexity, deep research, and just seeing what it thinks, like not giving it any context. And when I did it for this one, and I just asked it, why would all of these ingredients be included? I came up with a really nice story. I sent it to you as kind of something to read before the podcast to get a bit of a nice overview going, because it was actually a really good overview.
Yeah, great overview.
And at the end, it said, this is a very well put together formula that has a lot of synergistic things that are working in concert with each other. I was just looking at my watch and I see that we've been talking quite a long time about all of these different ingredients. There is really a lot to discuss, but I think we've kind of come to the end. We've looked at all of the different ingredients. We've given a good overview of what each one does, and to really talk about the important thing. This is a fiber, micronutrient, and nitrate and nitro fatty acid supplement, basically. It's going to be good for blood flow and just for overall daily support. It's something that I'm definitely going to be including in my stack. I think you probably will want to as well.
For sure. I'm really curious about it, and I think there's some effects that I'm interested in, particularly the digestive support. I think in general, just having smooth and regular digestive function is a really important part of my day, especially because sometimes when you're working with people and you've got really intensive projects going on, you can't afford to have digestive discomfort. It's just like an element of life and getting older that becomes, I think, more and more important over time. And this is one really big reason why I want to include it in my stack. I also want to include it in my daily stack because I just find taking powders is even more relaxing and kind of like a ritual. And I like having products that I can take where I can see the color, I can think about the kind of function it's having in my diet from like eat all of your colors perspective, and I can also stay hydrated. So this is really good. I like the format of the powder myself. And honestly, these are some greens that I probably wouldn't come into contact any other way. Spirulina and chlorella and the nettle, to be specific, and then these other slightly nootropic ingredients are also curious to me too. It's just a lot of new ingredients that I don't have coming from any other source in my supplement stack. So I think this is going to add a nice, just overall like well-rounded element of fiber and micronutrients and probably some good minerals as well, which I'm always looking for.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one thing I really like. Getting a bit more potassium in is always good. If you're eating quite a bit of sodium, which most of us do, you also want to be getting enough potassium so you can balance that all out. So having a product where you have a high potassium content, probably also coming from the sawmill, by the way, now that I'm thinking about it, because potatoes are really high in potassium. That's really beneficial. And it's not maybe the most exciting product. It's not going to make you feel a certain way or perform really high level in sports or whatever, but I think for just daily everyday support, just hitting your micronutrient goals, and I think it's a really good one to have. And I think especially for many of us that maybe one day you don't have that much time and you're just eating some sandwiches throughout the day to kind of stay satiated. If you do have, you always have a little bit of time to scoop some in water and drink it and get that micronutrient boost that maybe you would have missed the whole day. So that's maybe another use case for it. For many of us who do eat a lot of vegetables, maybe you don't want to be taking it every day. You could, and it would be beneficial, but if you want it to be a bit more cost effective, you could maybe reserve it for days where you know you're not going to be eating as healthy, and then just add some InfiniGreens to it to round out your overall diet for that day. For me, I'm just going to be taking it every day. I like it. There's no reason not to take it, in my opinion. But yeah, that brings us to the end.
This is a really intense episode, honestly, like so many ingredients and so much to cover, but I'm glad that we actually got to explore this product a little bit more. It's the first time I took it. I do like the very subtle effects that it has, and I definitely like the fact that this is something that feels really necessary to include just in my everyday life as a part of my diet, but also as a part of my supplement stack. So we're really curious also to hear how many of you are going to try InfiniGreens, and you can always tell us your experience with it. I'm curious to hear what your experience is with the flavor of it as well. On YouTube or on Reddit. Our subreddit is r/Nootropics Depot. You've got to go check out our subreddit and become a part of our community, because honestly there's so much information being shared and you can always learn something new. And we also share little tidbits and shorts on our Instagram as well. That's at In Search of Insight if you're curious to connect with us on Instagram. So definitely don't be a stranger. Follow us where you like to and where you can, and share this podcast with friends. We're super grateful that you are listening every month and that you're interacting, and we're excited to come back with next month a totally new topic, new research, and maybe even a new product to deep dive into.
Yes, probably Eureka Max.
Yeah, we'll keep you posted. So until then, thanks for listening to In Search of Insight, and we will see you next month.
See ya.
Bye.